Hey, welcome to the channel. This is Ben, and this is Art Studio on the Lake. This is the first in a series of bird carvings, and this is the end result. This is going to be 2 videos, and you can see the back side there is not as detailed as the front side. Call that romance side. In other words, the side that would normally sit out. And as you can see, he was just finished. This video won't take you all the way through this, and I'll explain the reason why here in a minute, but this is going to be a 2-parter. I do these to put them in your hand and show them to people. People like to look at them and hold them, and they from 3 or 4 feet away you get the impression that you're actually holding a real bird in your hand, and there's no finish on here. It's simply the burning pattern. So take you back in history. Take a look at the date on this one, April 1st, or April 2001. This is one of the cuckoos that my wife stole. I used to do a lot of these little birds and relatives and friends and different people, and I've sold quite a few of them. They all seem to go away fairly rapidly. But my wife will grab a carving out of there every now and again and grab it. This date on this one is also 2001, and you look at that, that's 20 years ago. And this guy's painted. There was a craze going on back then. They had a picture of a bluebird, and he was a mad bluebird. And so I tried to recreate him, and he came out fairly well. He looks like he's got an attitude. Something's gone wrong in his life. So there's a irritated or annoyed mad bluebird carving from back then. So out of these, this is going to be about a 30-minute on the first one, and I'm not sure on the second one because I haven't finished the editing on it yet. But this is definitely a tutorial, and the intention, I'm laying out the pattern on a piece of basswood. You saw me flip it all around. There is a branch in the front of that piece, and I avoided that. So this went over to the bandsaw. You notice the grain is running lengthwise on the piece, and he's fairly wide. So I'm going to draw his head up in the top there, because that's where I'm going to start. Now, how I do this, and since this is a tutorial, you don't have to do it that way. Obviously, you'll develop your own style as you go along. This video is done for a couple people. First of all, it was done for Michael LaFleur. He's one of the followers of the channel. Hi, Michael, and thanks for all the comments and stuff, man. He got an Optima burner, and he's been watching one of the bird videos, he said, over and over again to try to figure out what the heck is going on and how to do this. So this is designed pretty much for him. And then for Calvin, the head, if you notice, I didn't put this. I'm laying out just the head right now, and I turned that head a little bit to the left, looking at me, because I'm looking at him from the head on the left side. I didn't want it to be straight. If you make it straight, it looks inanimate. It doesn't have life about it. So I'm trying to get the pose in there. I'm just going to slowly work this down. And I'm going to put in pretty much the top of his head, and then when I get the head where I like it, I'll continue with the rest of the video. Again, you don't have to carve this way. This bird has no pattern. He's just one that along the lines of ones that I've done over the years. And like I said, these things sell almost as soon as they're done. If I get a chance, I may put a couple of them up on Etsy. Maybe even this guy. But you notice how tall that is. I'm not concerned about the bottom of it. I'm not concerned about the rest. I've got enough wood in the back behind the head to go. So here's a Kutzall burr, and I'm just going to kind of work a pattern around and get that head to come out of the rest of it. And I'm trying to leave as much as I can wood on that until I'm happy with the shape. So the second person that this video is done for is Calvin over at Calvin Carves. Used to be Calvin Hobby, and I sent him some basswood and a little bird that I'd put out fairly quickly, and it is a little bit rougher. And this guy's the finish is gonna go a little bit further. But this is for you, Calvin, and I wanted to I love your bird carving. and it's exactly the result exactly where you probably ought to be for where you're carving right now. From beginner carver to I don't like to use the word, I think it's overrated, to a master carver. But this video, when I was doing the editing on it, and especially in the second portion, it almost comes out like a master class on bird carving. So there's a lot of good stuff in here for everybody. So the hand piece we've talked about before, that's Ultima from PJL Enterprises. This is my 25-year-old one, and that has a saber burr in there, a medium grit, and you can see that medium grit's pretty aggressive. Now, here's the important part for you new folks. You'll notice that I'm looking at this thing, and I'm trying to keep it symmetrical. I'm starting to carve away my line there, but you'll notice how I'm working the back of the head. I put grooves down the side, and I keep staring at it, and I'm staring at it in profile. So a carving is meant basically to be read from 2 or 3 feet away. Some of them are read a little bit closer, but I'm actually looking through this piece and looking at the shadow or the outline of that head to see if it's matching. And there's kind of an idea when I hold it up to the camera there, you can see the head profile starting to come out. And I'm turning this around and around. Well, one of the interesting things is I'm not that concerned about his beak. You'd be surprised of how little the beak really matters in this thing. It's going to end up back a little bit away from his breast. A lot of people will look at this and start trying to carve the beak and then go forward. Well, I'm leaving wood on the end there, and that's going to help me determine where that beak comes out. So I'm carving the silhouette right now, and that's kind of hard to believe unless you wrap your mind around the fact that I'm drawing this on the wall. As I look through it, I look through the piece into my hand and see if I've got it. And it's still off a little bit, and a couple pieces there on the head when I look at it. But always go back and put your reference lines back in, so you have an idea, and you'll see how important some of these reference lines come in later on. This is going to take you through the end of this. I start to block out the feathering, and that's really what Michael wanted to see, was how the feathers are done, and I do put some of that in there for you. But there's the silhouette. You can see he's almost ready to come out of that block. There's a bonus for you, a little clicking noise in the background for those of you bad people out there that know what that means. So I'm still sticking with that saber burr, and I'm taking it down further, and I'm starting to leave a little bit of a cheek under there. You can see that right there. I got pretty aggressive. Now that I had the top of the head roughed out, and it's really fat right now. I left it purposely fat because I'm going to do some strange stuff here that's counterintuitive to carving this bird, and you'll see that. And one of them is that head doesn't get left that fat because it's going to get a little bit rounded, and then it's going to get an eye socket groove in there. And at that point, if you're watching and you've never done this, you're going to swear that I just ruined the whole thing. Now, many years ago, I've got a book around here somewhere, and I should start pulling those out and showing you some of them, where I learned to carve. And I primarily did birds throughout my career here, and then occasional weird stuff. This year, you guys asked for birds, so this first one's going to be just a handheld. The second one, I'm going to do a gentleman by the name of R.E., I believe, on initials, asked if I would do some shorebirds. And so logical progression this year tells you that I'm going to start with a little baby bird. I'm going to go to a shorebird. I'll probably do a full-up painted songbird of some sort. Then I'll progress on. I think I'm going to do a crow, because I kind of like the black. There's your silhouette. And then I'm going to move from that to a hawk, which is going to take a little bit more time. And then last but not least, I'm sorry, in between the hawk and the shorebird at some point, and songbird, I will do a traditional decoy. I want to do two styles of decoys in there. One is a smoothie, which just is exactly what this thing ends up at the end, with exception of the grooves. That means that there's no defined feather groupings, and it's not carved out on that. It's just smooth, and then it's done with paint. And a lot of gunning decoys in the old days were done that way. So you're looking at the silhouette of a duck primarily. And then I'm going to do some decoratives. Decorative meaning that it wasn't meant to hunt over or put on the water, and it has real fine feather groupings. So here's where it looks like I'm about ready to wreck this whole thing. So I started just above the beak there because it's going to feather down into the beak. I'm looking at both sides and trying to make it symmetrical. This is a saber burr again, kind of a big taper, not necessarily a flame. And I'm using the tip to get my line going. And I had a reference line there, you saw, where I wanted that. I poorly painted those eyes in. Now I'm looking at the front of him to see if those taper down in where I want. And you'll start to notice that left one is off a little bit. And I knew that, and I didn't fix it intentionally. I kind of left it alone. So I'm rounding over. They got the cheeks on there. The gentleman I was talking about that did birds. There's the Ward Foundation, Ward National Wildlife Foundation, or something along those lines, holds a woodcarving show in Maryland every year. And if you get a first in category, they have different levels of competition. But if you get a first in category there, your piece ends up in the museum. Instant acclaim to fame among the bird carving community, and some of the work that's coming out of there is fantastic, has been for several years now. But one of the characters that used to carve and did some work on that, Ernie Mulemat, and I may be massacring his name, but he put a book out on how to carve birds, especially songbirds. One of the things that he did, I've told you before, if you carve one of these birds true to life, 100%, it's kind of boring when it comes out. It needs to have a little bit of artistic or autistic work done on it. But he used to do what they call the mule mat bump, and he had a couple of bumps on the cheekbones that seemed to just bring the character out in a bird. I don't do that 100%, but I do leave that little cheek in there, and you'll see that as it goes along. So now you can see that head is not quite so fat. It's not symmetrical, and that's why I'm turning it around and looking at it from all the different sides and looking down. And you can almost see a bird. Now, if you haven't carved a bird before, like I said, when I put that eye ridge in there, you would have thought, man, he screwed this up. But now that you're looking at it, you can see the bird head actually starting to come out. Again, you'll notice I haven't done a whole lot with that beak. I'm just kind of leaving a nubby out there on the end. And as I cut that back, that'll come into play. I really like the way this guy came out. And I don't want to seem to be bragging or whatever, but this really did come out to be a master class in a bird carving, or how to go about carving a songbird. And this bird has no particular species. It was just designed, as I said, to sit in your hand, and it's part of a doodle that I did many, many years ago. It was so popular with people grabbing them and just taking them that I've continued to do them over the years. So I'm putting the eye line back in with the references there. This is the whole bird, 3 to 4 hours probably of carving. I cut this video down to about 30 minutes, and it takes you all the way through the shaping, and then at the end you're going to see that I could have left it alone without any burning, and you would have known what it is. But the second part goes into a lot of detail on the burning. So I set the one eye. There's a whole science to getting these eyes placed right. You can use a pattern, take calipers if you're not familiar with how birds go. I think if you actually were to take a bird head, that these eyes are probably not set where they're supposed to. But I took artistic license and put them, and I'm just kind of drawing it in to see if I like where that's at. And they're a little off, but his head is kind of, at this point I'm starting to carve it, so his head, as you look at it from the front there, is tilted kind of slightly to the right, and his head is looking to the left. And it's difficult to get these eyes to read from the front. A couple millimeters off will make the eyes look kind of wonky. Some people take pins and stick them in both the eyes and move the pins around, looking at it from all different angles until they get exactly what they want. I've done that. I don't have a lot of luck with that. I kind of have to go with trial and error on putting these eyes in. I've switched to my second favorite bit, which is that ruby flame or sapphire flame. I forget. I'd have to look at it. And I am doing a little bit of work on the beak now, and the reason I can do that is the eye channels are pretty much done. I'm poking in an eye socket there, and I still got my reference lines. Now I can kind of see where that goes. I'm going to put glass eyes in this, obviously. I think the eyes make the carving come alive. I'll get to the point where I try to get to the point where I can have enough removed that I can set the eyes, and at that point, to me, the carving has life. I have done and can do wooden eyes. I just find the glass eyes to be more realistic without the 16 steps needed to paint an eye in there and then get the either epoxy or something over top of it so that you can get the depth in the eye. So my eye box is getting a little bit low there. I'm searching through. I keep a pretty good group on hand, and I noticed that I probably need to order some more. And so I'll get that. But I order my glass eyes from Tohican Glass Eyes. They're a taxidermy company primarily, and ironically enough, they're designed for bird carvers. So I didn't know, not being a species, if you want to pull the species up, you'll get the color of eye that matches the species. These eyes are not expensive, but they're not cheap either. They're probably $5 a set, $5 to $15 a set, depending on how big you get. That was a 7mm in the background. This one also, I think, is a 7mm brown. And you can see I order them by the boatload. I believe this would be a 5. The hummingbirds are a 3 or a 4mm. So I pulled out one of the eyes. I don't have the socket prepared yet. I just kind of wanted to see if that eye was going to work in there. You see the knife that I made that I use for setting the eye, and I'm happy with that, even though the eye is not down in a socket. So we put a round diamond, cheap Chinese. It's just a hair bigger than the 5mm eye. And I'm again trying to keep these symmetricals. That's why you can see me keep turning it around. I want the eye to sit in there, but I don't want a big gap around it. And this one, you'll see me pushing pretty hard when I set these eyes. I could have, should have, would have made the eye socket just a little bit wider so that I could set these eyes a little easier and set them a little bit deeper. I'm taking that ball burr and rounding out the socket because I'm trying to get down to the point where the eye is gonna be set in there with the wood epoxy, and you don't want to touch that eye with any of these burrs or it'll scratch them. If you're following the channel, you can take some fingernail polish, clear fingernail polish, and put it over the eye if you scratch it with a burr, and it'll go away for the most part. You'll know it's there. So here's JV Quickwood. I keep a couple tubes around. This is what I set stuff with. I fix cracks. Stuff carves pretty well, and it's easy to work, and you just knead it for 2 or 3 minutes. You see I only took a portion off the end there, about half of it, and then it gets kneaded up for, like I said, 2 or 3 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. Has a working time of between 15 and 30 minutes, depending upon how hot or cold the studio is. And it's the middle of winter here in Wisconsin, so it's kind of cold right now. I took some old putty off that knife to set, and I'm just going to knead it until it becomes pretty much one color. This is the technique that I use to set the eyes. And you can see I just filled the socket, and try not to get too much excess in there. You'll see when we get to the decoys, I'll actually come back with some of this epoxy and roll it very thin, and put some eye ridges around, and do some feather groupings around the eye with the epoxy. Stuff that I can't or don't want to do necessarily with the carving. So now I'm just trying to stay flat and leave the stuff in the deal, but I want the excess to go away. One of the beauties about, nice things about setting this now, in addition to the carving coming alive with the eyes, is if you had feathers burned in or stoned in at this point, that stuff would have a tendency to fill the feathers, and you'd have to scrape it out or brush it out. Eye socket filled with the putty. I set that eye on there, and now I just push it down in there, and poof, it stays. Now the back of this knife that I'm playing with, and in fact the red Ramelson has the same thing, because I use it for burnishing a little bit, and I'll show you how that comes into play with the decoys more than anything else on the beak. But I use that to push that eye down, or the glass down into the socket. And now I'm taking off what's squeezing out around the edge. This one I will not, but on some of the decoys, the last time I push this in, it tends to raise up and roll over as it comes out of the eye socket, and that leaves a real nice natural ridge there, and you don't have to actually take this back down to the glass. You can leave that little rolled over edge on the putty. So this is the socket that turned out to be a little bit tight. I would have wanted that eye to go down in there a little bit more and a little easier, and you'll see me pushing on it pretty hard. I debated even taking and pulling the epoxy out of this eye, or the putty out of this eye, and redoing it. You see it's sitting a little bit proud. And I'd taken and actually pushed that in there pretty hard, but I decided that it was going to work. And now you can see that to me, that guy, he's alive at this point. There's a carving, there's a bird in there, and in reality, I could clean that up a little bit, and it'd be some kind of bird morphing out of the wood there. I don't typically do those types of carvings. I think they're a little too artistic, and to me, they seem to be kind of lazy. You know, if you're going to carve it, and be done with it. Carve the whole thing. Don't. It just looks to me like a lot of stuff that's morphing out of wood, and this is solely my opinion. Looks like they got lazy or didn't know where to go and thought, well, I'll just leave it here and we'll call it art. So at this point, I haven't done a whole lot with the body, but now that I've got the eyes in there and the head is relatively where I want it, I'm going to remove some of the wood around the front that I left, and shape the front of this character out. And when I get done here, you'll notice that I haven't really played with the back. And ironically enough, as tall as this guy looked, I thought I would end up taking some off the bottom of this bird when we initially started carving, because it looked like the head was going to be fairly tall and too high up and proportional wise. But ironically enough, this turned out to be just about right, and I didn't take anything off the bottom of this bird. So I've kind of rounded the front around, and each step through here you could almost quit. Really haven't done a lot of work shaping the beak. Now I've decided I got a lot of wood on the top and the back, and you see I got a original line there on the bottom where it's going to come under the tail, and I can remove quite a bit. I'm going to leave a lot on the back there because that's where the wings are going to cross over, and I could do this with anything, but it's just quicker to do it with a knife for me. Don't carve like that. That's not carving, that's whittling. This is back to the beginning there, where I'm working with a silhouette. I'm leaving portions you can see as I turn this all around. That if I were to paint this guy completely black right now and stick him up against a piece of white paper, each time I turned him around, that's a silhouette, and that's really what I'm looking at. I'm looking actually across the bird or through the bird, just like you can see there. If you look through that and use my jeans as a background, that's what you're looking for. And if something's sticking out or doesn't look right at that point, then that's the piece you need to take off. So there's his head. You can see I turned his head to the side. There's a well-known bird carver, and his name escapes me now. It'll come to me in the middle of this. But he does, Floyd, I believe is his name. He does fantastic carvings of birds, and various different birds, from songbirds on to hawks to cranes, that sort of thing. And he, in interviews about carving, when people ask him about his technique and whatnot and how he goes about it, he said that, well, I've been carving, and it sounds like he's bragging, but he's not. He said, I've been carving for so many years that I have the techniques that I use to get these feathers and groupings and whatnot and shapes, that I can do anything that I can imagine. So technically it's no longer a challenge. I'm not trying to figure out how to carve this bird. I'm working purely with poses. So I could have made this guy straightforward, head straight on, and he would not have had as much life as he does. But you'll notice with his head turned slightly to the left there, and the eye head turned slanted left to right, that he comes alive. And that's what he's talking about. You'll see a lot of people will do these in clay. Competition carvers will build this in clay to get the pose correct. There I'm throwing on the wings, and the wings are crossing over, and those are feather groupings in there. And we're coming pretty close to it. When I got to this point in the editing, I'm going to go a little bit further and set these feather groups. But that's where I decided to stop this video, because the next part, which should be up later today, so you can get part 2, is going to have all the feather detailing and how I go about it. So right now I'm blocking out feather groupings of where I want to go, and I'll have to see if I drew the reference lines in on when I started doing the feathering. But this feathering on this bird doesn't have a lot of stone work. Some of the others will, but it does have a lot of burn work. I didn't put any finish on him, and I'm leaving the wood burning to stand alone. So here's the front of the coverlets on the wing, and I'm just setting that grouping in. There's a secondary group, and that piece in the V in the middle will go away, probably not in this video but the next video. And then there's a secondary piece where the wings start to come in. You can see I just cut that in, and then the last piece will be the wing tips. And in this case, looking from above, the right one goes underneath the left one. And I'm making these symmetrical as I look from left to right. That's what I'm doing, making sure that they start and stop kind of in a logical place. And you can see that I didn't like where the end of that was, so I put more in. There's the wing coming down in the V. You can see this one goes over. Left wing goes over. That's the wing tips that I'm feather tips that I'm on there, and that one I'm cutting right there is under. And that little V that I left there is going to be the tip of that right wing. And then I just took down a little bit from the tail. So there you have him. His feather groupings are laid out. They're not realistic. I'm not counting each one. If it was a competition piece, they'd have to be counted. You could have a beautiful piece and someone looks at it and goes, oh my God, there's only 4 wingtips in here. There should be 7, or there should be 9, or there's 9 and there should be 6. So the judges actually get down to counting them. It's like if you did a hand and it had 4 fingers on it instead of the 5, including the thumb, I guess, or it would be wrong. And if you put 6 fingers on there, it would be glaring. Well, these judges know the characteristics of these birds in the competitions, and you really need a reference and an understanding of bird anatomy, or you're not going to win. This guy's made up. He has no, I guess if he'd probably be a sparrow. So it's coming to close to the end of this one here, and you can see how far I've gone. I'm starting to lay in the beak there. I haven't pulled a lot of that out. But you could smooth this guy up, I think, right now and just do a little finish work. And poof, you'd have a baby bird. But like we've got the rest of the master class here. So there's how he turned out to this point. And Michael, I hope that helps you out. Calvin, the same thing. So like, comment, and subscribe, and stand by, and I'll put the second part in there, and then we'll continue on down with it. Thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake.